Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of the Platonic City. Did Plato's Republic actually exist somewhere? Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. In 375 BC, Plato wrote the most influential political document in Western history, a blueprint for an ideal city-state ruled not by wealth or birth, but by philosophical wisdom. He called it the Republic. For 2.5 millennia, scholars have debated whether it was a genuine political proposal or a philosophical thought experiment, a diagram of the soul drawn in city-shaped lines. Plato himself, it turns out, tried to answer that question in person. 3 times in his life, Plato sailed to Syracuse, the powerful Greek city-state in Sicily, to attempt something almost no philosopher has attempted since: to turn theory into governance. He had a student there, a man named Dion, who had access to the tyrant's court. He had a patron in the tyrant's son, and he had, briefly, the opportunity to try to build something like his ideal city. All 3 attempts ended in failure. The last came very close to ending in his death. What happened in Syracuse, and what does it tell us about whether philosophy can ever govern anything? This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the broader phenomenon of lost civilizations, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. The ocean has a long memory. As the last ice age ended around 12,000 years ago, sea levels worldwide rose by more than 120 meters, enough to drown entire coastal civilizations that may have flourished along shorelines that no longer exist. The continental shelves that now lie submerged beneath shallow coastal seas were once habitable land. River deltas, bays, and estuaries that today lie underwater were once the most attractive real estate on Earth, rich in resources, temperate in climate, and accessible by sea. If ancient peoples built their settlements where resources were most abundant, then much of the archaeological record of early civilization may be sitting on the ocean floor, invisible to conventional excavation. This is not speculation. Marine archaeologists have already found submerged ruins at dozens of locations worldwide, off the coasts of India, Japan, Cuba, and the Mediterranean islands. In some cases, these structures are clearly artificial: stone walls, carved steps, and rectilinear platforms that could not have formed naturally. The academic debate is not whether these structures exist, but what they mean. Were they built by unknown pre-flood cultures, or were they coastal settlements of known civilizations gradually abandoned as waters rose? The answer, in many cases, remains open. What oral traditions add to this picture is equally significant. Cultures living on or near the sea throughout the tropics and subtropics carry remarkably consistent flood narratives, stories of a great inundation that drowned an earlier world. These are not borrowed from one another through colonial contact. They predate European exploration. They appear to be independent memories of a shared catastrophe, the end of the last ice age, when the world coastlines changed forever and entire ways of life were drowned. The civilizations that built on those shores, if they existed, vanished beneath the waves. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns, in science, demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding the Platonic City, did Plato's Republic actually exist somewhere, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. Plato, 428–348 BC, described his ideal city-state in the Republic Pallidea, written around 375 BC. The city is governed by philosopher kings, those who have achieved genuine knowledge of the good, with a guardian class holding property in common and a producing class beneath. The dialogue frames the city as an analogy for the just soul rather than a literal political program, though this interpretation has been contested since antiquity. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly, it is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered, in Laws, his final and longest work, Plato described a more practically implementable city called Magnesia, a second-best city without philosopher kings, governed instead by detailed law codes. The laws include specific provisions on land distribution, criminal penalties, education, religious practice, and constitutional structure. It is the most concrete political document Plato produced and was taken seriously as a constitutional model by later Hellenistic founders. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. Plato founded the Academy in Athens around 387 BC after his first visit to Syracuse. The Academy was not merely a philosophical school, but an institution that trained political advisors and future rulers. Several of Plato's students went on to advise or govern city-states across the Greek world, making the Academy a genuine attempt to insert philosophical education into political practice. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation, but the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, Plato made 3 visits to Syracuse. The first, around 388 BC, brought him into contact with Dion, the brother-in-law of the tyrant Dionysius I, who became his devoted student. The second, around 367 BC, came at the invitation of Dionysius Roman II, who briefly expressed interest in philosophical education. The third, around 361 BC, ended with Plato effectively under house arrest before being allowed to return to Athens. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators, they are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of Dion. Plato's most committed political student seized control of Syracuse in 357 BC following a military campaign against Dionysius Roman II. He attempted to implement reforms consistent with Platonic principles. He was assassinated in 354 BC by Callippus, a fellow student from the Academy, one of the grimmer ironies in the history of philosophy. The experiment in Platonic governance lasted less than 3 years. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding. Karl Popper's The Open Society and Its Enemies, 1945, mounted an influential attack on Plato as the intellectual ancestor of totalitarianism, arguing that the Republic's philosopher kings, censorship of art, and rigid class structure prefigured 20th century authoritarian ideology. The argument remains controversial among classicists, but has shaped popular reception of Plato's political philosophy for 80 years. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations. And in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Platonic City. Did Plato's Republic actually exist somewhere? This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that the Republic was never intended as a literal political blueprint. It is a philosophical thought experiment about the nature of justice, using the city as a scale model of the individual soul. Under this mainstream scholarly view, associated with Julia Annas and others, the ideal city is explicitly described by Plato as existing only in speech, not in practice. The objection is that Plato's 3 voyages to Syracuse suggest he did believe political implementation was at least worth attempting. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that Plato genuinely attempted to implement his political ideas through his relationship with Dion and the Syracuse court, and his 7th letter documents these attempts in his own words. If the 7th letter is authentic, debated by scholars, it shows Plato as a practical political operator, not merely a theoretical philosopher. The failure of the Syracuse experiments does not prove the ambition was purely theoretical. It proves that the political conditions were not right. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that Atlantis in Plato's dialogues functions as the negative exemplar, a civilization corrupted by wealth and power, set against the ideal city as its rhetorical opposite. Under this reading, Atlantis and the Republic are 2 sides of the same political argument, one showing what justice looks like and the other what its corruption produces. The objection is that this reading subordinates the historical question about Atlantis to the philosophical one, which may not reflect Plato's actual intention. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Platonic City, did Plato's Republic actually exist somewhere, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes Plato's seventh letter, if authentic, is the primary evidence for his political ambitions in Syracuse. It describes all three visits, his relationship with Dionysius Roman II, Dion's seizure of power, and Plato's disillusionment with practical politics. Scholars are divided on authenticity. Some consider it genuine, others a later forgery, but its account of the Syracuse events is consistent with other ancient sources that independently document the same episodes. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented Aristotle's Politics, written by Plato's most distinguished student within a generation of the Republic, critiques Plato's ideal city as impractical on specific grounds. Common property undermines motivation, the guardian class lacks human incentives, and philosopher kings are an unrealistic criterion for rule. This is the earliest academic engagement with Platonic political philosophy and treats the Republic as a genuine, if flawed, political proposal, not merely an allegory. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed Hellenistic planned cities, Alexandria, Antioch, Pergamon, and others, show evidence of deliberate constitutional design consistent with political philosophy of the academy tradition. Alexandria's constitution and the museum it housed reflect the ideal of philosopher-informed governance. These cities do not implement Platonic constitutions directly, but they suggest the Academy's political ideas had practical influence on Hellenistic state building. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Platonic City. Did Plato's Republic actually exist somewhere? Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. Karl Popper's reading of Plato as a proto-totalitarian remains widely cited and widely contested. Julia Anna's An Introduction to Plato's Republic, 1981, provides the standard philosophical rebuttal. The utopian tradition, Thomas More, Francis Bacon, and beyond, explicitly cites Plato as its origin. The physical site of the Academy in Athens was rediscovered archaeologically in the 20th century and is now a public park. Plato's political thought remains foundational in philosophy programs worldwide, and the question of whether the Republic describes a literal or allegorical ideal continues to generate serious scholarly debate. The Syracuse experiments remain the most direct evidence that philosophy's most ambitious theorist believed his ideas could be made real, and discovered, at considerable personal cost, that they could not. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Platonic City. Did Plato's Republic actually exist somewhere? From the historical record, through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Plato ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please subscribe to the channel. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment below telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.